this gray being looks at her, and she's just flooded with this thing in her mind that is just like this alarm that's going owl, 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 owl. And she watches this gray being morph into an owl, a 4-foot tall owl, turns around and runs into the woods. My name is Mike Clelland, and for the last 18 years or so, I have been doing what feels like full-time research on owls and how they relate to paranormal experiences. And the core of my work has been how owls seem to be connected to the UFO contact experience. And this came about due to my own personal experiences, and then I just felt like my old life ended and a new life began, and I have been on this track, and it has proven to be absolutely rewarding. And the people who are reaching out to me with their stories, I have received a wealth of absolutely amazing stories that have forced me to change the way I look at what we call reality. This owl stuff started in 2006 for me. And at that chapter of my life, I had been working at an outdoor school doing really ambitious backpacking work and mountaineering work in Alaska and all throughout the Rockies. And so I came back to my little town where I was living at the time in Idaho, right near the Tetons, the Grand Tetons. And I met this woman, and she had been living right there in this little town with this magical camping right out the back door. And I said, we should go camping. I'll take you out camping for one night. And I've told this story to people, and they kind of go like, you took someone out camping? Like you never like a first date? And I said, well, it was kind of camping culture, so it's not as strange as you might think. So her name is Kristen. We're still friends today. And we went in the mountains for one night, and went with really light packs, and we got deep, deep into the mountains, and our plan was just to spend one night out. It was going to be a beautiful night, and this would have been in the autumn, just early September, I think. And we were sitting on a big flat rock in this gorgeous meadow as the sun was setting, and I was having a conversation with her, and she said something, and I was like, whoa, I did not expect this. This woman is smarter than I expected. This woman is more insightful. This woman is more spiritual. And as I had that thought, an owl swooped over us, and then another owl, and then a third owl. And so for the next couple of hours, as the sun set, these owls were flying around us. And there came a point when we laid our sleeping bags down on the ground. We put our pads down, laid our sleeping bags on the ground. We didn't bring a tent, and we were under this magnificent sky in the northern Rockies. They're just astounding. And owls are very silent in flight, and they would swoop down right over our faces, and the sky would be blotted out for just a blink of an eye. And the next morning we were like, wow, that was pretty great. That was pretty great. Let's go camping again. So 4 days later, we did the same thing. We went camping to a totally different part of the mountains. The sun was setting. We were in this lovely meadow, and an owl flew over us, and then a second owl, and then a third owl. It happened twice in 4 days. The first time, the owls kind of kept their distance a little bit. They'd be on the tree just a little bit over there. Here, they were on the branch right next to us, and one of them landed at our feet. I could so clearly see Kristen's look of astonishment looking down on the ground at this owl at her feet. And both times, I had a thought in my head. I did not talk about it at the time. Now I can't shut up about it. But at the time, I had a voice in my head that very clearly said, this has something to do with the UFOs. I was looking at a real owl, little 10-inch tall, cute owl. It's called a short-eared owl. It's pretty common. And I was looking at this real owl. The voice in my head said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And at that chapter of my life, I had a set of memories that were starting to be a little oppressive, and I couldn't keep the lid clamped down on them. So I was seeing owls I had a voice in my head that says, this has something to do with the UFOs. After that, I started looking into owls, the mythic folklore of owls, the spirit meaning of owls, and I started looking into what might have been UFO contact in my life. And everything unfurled. I just became unhinged. I was at the receiving end of such unrelenting synchronicities. And as I said, my old life ended and this new life began. Oh, and let me say one more thing. 3 years later, after seeing the owls, that would have been 2006. In 2009, I started a blog, and I put the story, the one I just told you about, Kristen in the mountains and seeing the owls. I put that on my blog. But I was like, what were we talking about? When the first night, when we saw the first owls, what were we talking about? So I called her up. She moved away. She was living back in Michigan. I called her up, and I said, Kristen, what were we talking about the very first night when we saw the very first owls? She said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. I was giving my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. So I was already on shaky ground. And when she said that, like, I'm not at all churchy. I wasn't sort of swept away by that. But I recognized the mythic power in what she was saying. And that mythic power was sort of, I feel like I'm a magnet for people telling me stories that have that heightened mythic power. In the years after that, I was flooded with synchronicities, and all the synchronicities, powerful, highly charged coincidences, they all seem to point to owls or UFOs. And I reached out to, there was a researcher in Laramie, Wyoming. He's since passed, a wonderful, big-hearted guy, Leo Sprinkle. I went to see Leo, and I sat in his office, and I told him all these things. Oh, this happened to me, and this happened to me. And I had a lot of things that had happened in my youth and as a young adult. And I remember sitting in his office, and he was a clinician, he's a therapist, and I said, yeah, I don't think I'm a UFO abductee. And Leo he let out this roar of a laugh, and he laughed right in my face. And I've told this to people, and they kind of go, like, clinicians shouldn't do that. And I was like, oh, no, he sized me up. It was the perfect thing. It was what I needed. So I was looking to my own experiences simultaneously with looking into owls. And what was happening is I was seeing so many owls. People around me would notice it. Like, wow. And it got to be so much. There was a trail near my house, and I went all alone to this trail, and I stood in the woods alone, and I kind of made a plea to the universe. Essentially, I prayed. I said, I'm not going to pay attention to some owl over on a fence post anymore. If you want my attention, you got to cross my path. And it was about 2 days later, I was riding my bike through the little town, just a gentle little hill, and I was just coming down, coasting, and I looked, and there was an owl on the phone lines, on the power lines, on one side of the street, and it just dropped off the thing, and it floated right at eye level, right past me on the bicycle. If my arm was outstretched, I probably could have touched it, and it alighted into a pine tree on the other side of the street. So I said, I'm not going to pay attention unless you cross my path. In less than 48 hours later, one crossed my path in such a dramatic way. And I've told some of these stories. There's a raptor center in Jackson Hole. And I remember talking to a guy, he's an ornithologist, and I started telling him these stories. And I said, does this happen? You hear these stories? He said, no, we don't hear those stories. Oh, and then this happened. And I just told owl story after owl story. And I felt like the crazy uncle at the family reunion. I could see this guy just like, I got to get away from this guy. And so to me, the owl, people see owls all the time. They're just a normal bird. They're all over the place. You don't see them a lot because they come out at night. And then the UFO thing, UFO is very rare, right? People don't see a lot of UFOs. It happens very rarely, but it does happen. So I tried to weight these two stories. I tried to treat a powerful owl story exactly the same way that I would treat a powerful UFO story. And so that had been sort of my mission statement that I gave myself as I went into this work. And I started a blog, and little by little, like I started telling these stories, and then people started sharing the stories. And right on my blog, I said, I want to hear your owl stories. Tell me your owl stories. And then anyone I would meet in the field, I would say, hey, do you have any odd stories with an owl? And they would look at me like, no one's ever asked me that before. I have the weirdest story. I have the weirdest story. So I started collecting these stories, and I started collecting them and archiving them and then putting them in books and trying to make sense of them. And it has been so rewarding, so beautiful and so rewarding. And it is not slowing down. I get 2 owl stories a day, no problem. Sometimes I get a few more. 6 stories a day is not uncommon. I almost never get 0 stories a day. So these are arriving in my email inbox, and it's been going on for 17 years. Do the math. It's I feel like I'm walking uphill in sand. I have so many owl stories that it is just, I have forgotten more owl stories than anyone else in the world has heard. That's the way it feels like. In the West here, when you think of owls, you think of wisdom, and that comes from the goddess of wisdom, Athena, who had a companion owl. She is pictured often with a little owl, and that's a real species of owl. It's called a little owl, and it's a Mediterranean bird, and so it's a little owl that was perched on her usually on her wrist. And that folklore is, 2,500 years old. And the deeper folklore, the deeper mythology, the deeper meaning of the owl would be that the owls can see into the darkness. So modern man, we can say, oh, they have highly developed eyes. Through evolution, they have achieved this ability to see into what we would call complete darkness. But for ancient man, they would say it was magic. The owl can fly freely in the forest on the darkest night, fly between the trees, fly between the branches, and they would have seen that as magic. And so the owl became a metaphor for seeing into the dark, for seeing into the unknown, for seeing into that shadow realm. And they were thought of as traveling to another land, to another dimension, to the land of the gods, to the land of the dead, to that other realm. And then they would come back with a message. That's the lore of the owl. Now, present day, we have Harry Potter. It's the most popular series of books in the history of books, in the history of publication. Harry Potter. This is not some book on a dusty shelf somewhere. Harry Potter has an owl that delivers the mail. It is perfect. It is perfect. It is delivering a message. It could not be any clearer. This is an ancient mythology making itself known, present day, and everyone is familiar with those books, and everyone knows that the owl delivers the mail, and this ancient folklore is alive and well present day. J.K. Rowling has O-W-L right in the middle of her name. That's more of an insight into how my mind can work sometimes. So don't go too deep with that one. So a guy reaches out to me. He sends me his story. He was meditating in an orchard behind his house. He went there to meditate, and he sat there quiet in the meditative state. And then there's, right at the edge of the orchard, there's a forest. And there was this horrible screeching that was coming out of the forest, like really scary screeching noises. And he was like, whoa, everything about it said, I got to get out of here. He said, no, I'm going to go and face this. So he walked into the forest. Didn't take him long. There's a barred owl on a branch. And a barred owl is the loudest North American owl. And they have a booming call. And he said, this thing was looking right at me. And it was screeching, and it felt like it was chewing me out. That's what he said. It felt like it was angry at me. And then it flew off, and he went back to the house, and they're having dinner, and the kids are there, and he tells his wife and the kids, it's like this owl out in the forest. It was looking at me, and it was screeching at me, and the kids are rolling their eyes like, Dad. And after dinner, he takes his camera, he goes back to the forest, and stands in the spot where he saw the owl before, and he says, my family doesn't believe me. I need a picture. And this owl flies up and lands on a branch. He gets a picture. And I said, What were you meditating on? What was your intention? He said, oh, I had been struggling with what God is. I was asking the meaning of God. Doesn't get any bigger than that. It doesn't get any bigger than that. The owl is not a little light and fluffy totem. It is as heavy as it gets. So many people have experiences of, I want to understand what happened to my dead mother, and an owl will appear. People will say, I want to understand what a UFO is, and an owl will appear. These are exactly the kinds of things that it is the biggest, deepest spiritual questions, and these owls seem to show up. So I've asked UFO researchers, people who are actively doing full-time research work into UFO, mostly UFO abduction, and I ask them, do you have any stories with owls? And they look at me like, we get owls all the time. We get owls all the time. They're screen memories. And the implication is that someone driving down the road at night, and there's a big owl in the road, and they see the owl, and they stop the car, and then they get home, and a couple hours later, like somehow the time, they feel like they've lost a few hours. They were supposed to be home at midnight, and it's 2 a.m. And what was up with that owl? So they go through hypnotic regression, and I've talked to the hypnotherapists. I've read the transcripts, and the hypnotherapist says, okay, describe the owl that's in front of you on the road. And they'll say, okay, it's bald. It has big black eyes. It's got a tight-fitting spacesuit on. It's really, really skinny, and I don't think that's an owl. So the implication is that somehow these alien entities, these non-human entities, have the ability to put a false memory into the mind of the observer. Whether they do that through technology or psychic means, I can't answer that. But the consistency of those stories is so remarkable. This number of people who see a 4-foot-tall owl is, I saw a 4-foot-tall owl. I'm like, owls don't get to be 4 foot tall. Like if a 2-foot-tall owl is really big. But that's what people say. They say, I'm seeing a 4-foot-tall owl. I have a good friend. When she was 19 years old, she was working at a summer camp for girls. And she, at that point in her life, as a young teen, was well aware that she was having experiences with gray alien beings coming in her house. And she was dealing with a lot. But it always happened at night. So she was working with these kids in a camp, in a wilderness setting. So there was a set of girls camp here, and they'd walk a little trail, and then there was a set over here. That's where the tents could be put up and stuff. So these 2 little spots were just a little short walk between on a trail. So she's going from one to the other. She could hear the girls in the background. And she turns a corner in the trail, and there's a gray alien standing in the trail. Full daylight, sun shining off its big, chalky white head. And this thing looks at her, and she looks at it. Now, almost all the communication, I'll amend that. All communication between these alien beings and people is reported to be telepathic. Nobody's moving their lips. So this gray being looks at her, and she's just flooded with this thing in her mind that is just like this alarm that's going owl, 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 owl. And she watches this gray being morph into an owl, a 4-foot-tall owl, turns around and runs into the woods. So these owls aren't connected to the UFO per se. They seem to be connected to a whole host of other paranormal type experiences. People who, in the Bigfoot research community, have all kinds of owl stories. Oddly enough, I'm not getting them. I hear them when I talk to people in the Bigfoot community, and I know a few people, and they have great stories, and they sure seem to have owls that show up in these stories. And I'm asking to hear people's owl stories. I'm getting them. I get so few from the Bigfoot community. That's interesting. And I feel like if I was more a part of that community, I would get many more. So I don't think there's any mystery there to why I'm not getting them. I think it's just I'm putting a message out to one corner of the population, and they're just a few degrees off my target population. So one of the stories that I have heard, and it feels like it's a pattern, and people in the Bigfoot research community share these stories with me, and it involves just people hearing noises in the woods, and their strong sense is that the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot, is mimicking the sound of an owl. So why are they choosing an owl? So it would be the same reason that the gray aliens would be choosing the owl. And now I'm going out on a limb with this. This is my very strong feeling. I cannot prove it, but my very strong sense is they are choosing the owl because it is an archetype. It is the owl comes preloaded with all kinds of mythic qualities that I think humanity understands at a core level. So the definition of an archetype, I think philosophy students could sit up late at night in the dorm and wrestle over what this may or may not mean. But for me, it feels like somehow within our DNA, we are imbued with a deeper knowledge of what an owl is. No one has to teach it. We know it automatically, that an owl represents a powerful, deep meaning, and it goes back to that ancient mythos. The owl can travel in the dark. So there's this shadow message that is coming through by using the owl. I would say the owl is the totem of these deeper levels of reality. And that is what is coming back to us in these powerful, highly charged experiences, whether it's a UFO, whether it's a tripping on psychedelics, or whether it's a Bigfoot off in the forest, that will reflect back these deeper archetypal truths. There are a few characters out there that have repeated owl stories of such power that it defies any kind of logical explanation. I would include myself on that list. I could name about 5 people, and their stories alone could fill up 10 novels. Here's a really perfect, clean example of owls and UFOs parallel on the same plane. I weight them the same. I was camping, a good friend of mine, her name is Natasha. We were camping in the desert, and she's from Germany, and she came over to go camping with me. And so we drove around the desert, and she had just come over, and she was jet lagged. And I had been driving all day, so I'm tired. We got this beautiful spot out on the sand, all alone on this lonely, lonely road. And the car's right there, and we both our sleeping pads are down on the sand, and she kind of wakes me and goes, "Mike, I can't sleep. I'm totally jet lagged. I can't sleep. What do I do?" And I said, "Take a walk. Go take a walk. It's a beautiful spot here." Now, Natasha had also had in her life what very clearly sounds like UFO contact experiences, as have I. And so she says, "Is it safe?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, you're in a really safe part of the world right here." And she goes, "Okay." So she walks away. And as she walks away, I'm lying there, and there's a bush right near my head, a juniper bush, and there is a great horned owl in that bush, and it is booming. It has this booming, strong call, and they're unmistakable. The call of the great horned owl it's like what we think of when you think of an owl hooting in the woods. So here it is in the desert, ringing out as loud as it can be. I sat up, and this bush was like, literally, I could touch this bush. I could not figure out why I couldn't see it. Natasha, on her walk, she said, "I got a little ways away. I didn't need a flashlight. There was no moon. The stars lit up everything. It was so magical. It was so magical, it felt like I was sparkling. And as I walked along, suddenly there was a light. Like there's a light off in the bushes, on the sagebrush, on the side of the road. And then she realized it's a floating little ball of light. And then the ball gets really big, like the size of a beach ball, and sort of comes towards her and stops, and then poof, it explodes. And now she's scared. So she runs back to me, and she kicks me away. Says, "Mike, we got to get out of here." I'm like, what? And she says, she tells me what happened. I'm like, now I'm scared. I'm like, "Well, yeah, let's get out of here." And then we drive away and said, "Did you hear the owl?" She said, "No, what owl? I didn't hear any owl." So there was an owl hooting right near my head. And so we have the GPS coordinates of all this, and I got maps of all this. I have the satellite photos of, like, here's where I saw the orb, here's where I was sleeping, and I don't understand how she couldn't have heard that owl. That should have rung out on a still night in the desert. People a half a mile away should have heard that. So we have a UFO, little ball of light, unidentified flying object is a UFO, and then we have an owl, simultaneous. It's as good as it gets, as far as meeting the criteria of what I want in an owl and UFO story co-joined. So I'm immersed in this research, and I'm asking for stories. I'm saying, I want to hear your owl stories, and I'm getting them. So I am not getting, like, the UFO continuum is like, ooh, it's so big. It is so big. There's so much stuff going on there, from like the government documents to the people who feel like they're like communing with their space angels. Like, there's a lot going on there. I'm looking at the thinnest little sliver. I'm pulling on this tiny thread. I'm only asking for the owl stories, and I'm getting them. So my data pool is completely skewed, and I am not objective. I am totally subjective. This is my journey. I had my own experiences. I'm trying to answer what is going on with me. Why did this happen to me? It's all well and good that other people are having these other experiences. I'm selfish. I want to know. And I learned pretty quickly those answers are fleeting. It may be impossible to get that answer. I don't know the source of this mystery. All I can really do is look at the patterns that are emerging in the stories that I hear from people. So I've given up on trying to find an answer. All I can say is something is happening. I don't know the source of it, but I can see very clear patterns in the stories. There's a flavor and mood to these stories that are undeniable. I recognize them so clearly when someone tells me one of these stories. And I recognize it when someone tells me these stories. Now, an owl as an animal, it has the most highly tuned eyes in the animal kingdom. It, more than its eyes, are its hearing. It has, as wonderful as their eyes are for seeing in the darkness, they have better hearing than any animal with a vertebrae. So if you were going to pick an animal to kind of dance in these waters, they are so highly attuned. They have such heightened sensitivity for gathering input. They would be the perfect animal to they would be the perfect animal to act as a sort of like an alien centurion or an alien spy. An owl could very easily sit on the branch outside your house and hear your conversation in the house. And an owl would be able to watch you in complete darkness. So you can pull on that thread and go down that road, and it's very satisfying. But at the end of the day, for me, who's been wrestling with this stuff, we are confronted with a genuine mystery. I have to be at peace with that mystery, because I don't think I'm going to solve it. When people reach out to me with their owl stories, I have 4 questions that I ask them. I used to ask a big, long list. I boiled it down to 4. What was going on in your life leading up to the event? What changed after the event? Do you have psychic abilities? Do you have healing abilities? Given those 4 questions, you should get a pretty good idea of what I'm receiving in my email inbox and the stories I'm getting and the people I talk with. People who have these experiences usually are in a place of, let's say, yearning or struggling. They'll have an experience with an owl. It'll change their life. They'll have a spiritual awakening. And then they'll become psychic or become a healer. It's not 100% of the people who see an owl in the woods can tell this story, but it usually has to be a little more highly charged event with an owl than just seeing one on a fence post as you drive by. But that is what I'm finding. It is a totem of the transformational process. People change after these experiences. I saw those owls in the mountains with Kristen. My old life ended. My new life began. As I get into this research, I actually like the stories that don't have UFOs in them. I kind of have learned to find those are much more fascinating to me, and there's something richer in those stories. So I had an experience with a great horned owl. I lived in this little town in Idaho, and there was a bike path right in front of my house, so you could get on the bike path and go right to town. And I just had this thing. I could get out of the house. I got to go to town. So I got my bike and got on the bike path. And as soon as I got on the bike path, my old girlfriend was on the trail. She's now married and she has kids. This was a really important relationship in my life. And we hadn't seen each other much. Very small town, but we had seen each other, but it was just never quite. So there she was. I got to ride my bike with her. I kind of walked my bike with her. She was pushing her little boy on a stroller, and her little daughter was on a little bitty bicycle. And she said to me, when we went out, we saw so many animals. We saw so many animals. And I was like, yeah, I've been doing this research into owls. And so we go along, and there's a point where the car is parked, and she's going to get back in her car. She was just taking the kids on the bike trail for a walk. And there's a bridge right there where the parking lot is. And so as we're approaching the bridge, on the other side of the bridge, I just see this little flit. And I was like, that was an owl. That was an owl. So I get these two little kids. They're like 4 and 7. They're little. And I'm like, come on, follow me. And so we go and we walk into the woods. And there's an owl, a great horned owl, right on a branch, right at eye level. It is as good as it gets. It's 15 feet away. And these little kids are like, wow. And then it flies off. And then we go back to where Carol is parked. And the little girl goes, Mom, do you love Mike? Do you love Mike? Mom, do you love Mike? And she goes, no, we're just good friends. Mom, do you love Mike? This plays out like a dream. It plays out like a poem. It has a meaning that I cannot logically tell you why this story is important to me. But boy, in my heart, in my intuition, that story has a magic to it. And those are the stories that keep me going in this research. Like, I don't need a UFO in the story anymore. Like, I got plenty. Like, no one needs to prove to me that like UFOs and owls are somehow connected. But what I'm finding is, in the data pool that I'm getting, there are 5 things that show up with the owl stuff. The first would be owls and UFOs. Wow, I'm asking for those stories. I'm getting them. The next on the list, the thing that's filling my inbox, the stories that I'm getting would be owls and death. Owls showing up around the time of a death of someone. And it's the lore is that owls show up before someone dies. That's the mythology. That's not what I'm finding in my files. I'm finding that owls show up after the death of a loved one, most often a parent. And here's what I'm getting. Someone will see an owl, let's say after their mother dies, and they will talk to the owl as if it is their mother, and their grieving is eliminated. This is consistent. I'm certain this has been happening all throughout human history. Okay, UFOs, death. The next would be meditation. People meditating see owls. They have an intention, they close their eyes, they open their eyes, and there's an owl staring at them in the window, lined up with them. People meditating outside in the woods. They meditate, they close their eyes, they open up. There's an owl on the branch staring right at them as they open their eyes. Very common. The third would be psychedelics. People taking psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms, will have powerful visionary experiences with owls. I get a lot of flack for this. Like, you listen to people on like drugs, and I'm like, well, like that's shamanic traditions and stuff like that. So yes, and then the final one would be the shaman thing. That people going through shamanic initiation see owls. It is well understood in the community of shamans. There's plenty of shamans out there doing good work, healing work. So UFOs, death, meditation, psychedelics, shamanic initiation. Those are filling my inbox. So you look at this pattern. So the owl is not connected to the UFOs. The owl is connected to this constellation of highly charged human experiences. The owl doesn't seem to be attracted to the UFO. It is attracted to these highly charged human experiences. These 5 experiences are mystical. They're transformative. Going from a shamanic initiate to becoming a shaman, that's a transformation. Death is the ultimate transformation. These highly charged human experiences, that is what I'm finding in the files. The UFO is just another little human experience. Has a lot of power, but so does psychedelics, so does a deep meditative state, so does a shamanic journey. And that's the golden thread that I've been pulling out.